We begin with a Fox News alert. Our nation's finest are facing increasing threats on the job. The National Fraternal Order of Police is warning about a sharp increase in ambush-style attacks on police officers this year. And that union says the uptick can be traced to the defund the police movement. You're watching Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. Here today, my co-hosts, Emily Campagno and Kayleigh McEnany, and we're in person. Host of Kennedy on Fox Business, Kennedy herself. And in the virtual center seat, John James, former U.S. Senate candidate and Iraq War veteran. Great to see you all. Well, we are learning 128 police officers have been shot so far this year. And there have been 27 ambush-style attacks on officers. That's up 50% in ambush attacks compared with last year. And this, all as we get new video of a police officer in San Francisco under attack. Oh. A homeless man violently pushing a female officer to the ground as several bystanders rushed to help before backup officers arrived. One police official warning this shows the dangers of police staff shortages and what he calls a criminal-first progressive agenda. And this dramatic body cam video from Northern California shows police risking their lives, racing into a building after a gunman killed 9 of his co-workers at a rail yard. Remember, this was breaking about this time last week. The shots were still flying. The officers carefully, strategically moving throughout that building with their guns drawn, passing through rooms as they could hear the gunshots. And eventually, they find the gunman who had fatally shot himself.
Hey, we need that key card over here, bro.
All right, I'm pushing back to you guys, okay?
Yeah.
Which one you need? Door right behind us. Oh, we get stimulus. We get stimulus. Third floor. That's right, third floor.
Conference room? Okay, I got somebody down in front of me.
We got somebody there.
1, 3.
10, 5, 6, maybe. Let me see your hands.
Hold right, hold right, hold right.
Hold on.
We got that stairwell.
Sheriff's office, sheriff's office, sheriff's office.
Holding this.
Yep.
Okay, he's in here.
Hold that, hold that. Watch his hand, watch his hand. Be careful. Watch his hand. Watch his
Hold that stairwell.
stairwell.
Hold that stairwell.
Top side's clear.
Professionals moving in to protect and serve. John James, you know what really stands out to me about this whole video and the close-up that we get to see of those cops going to work is how well trained and strategic they are in their movements. And it's reminiscent of what we see sometimes in our military. And I know you're a war vet, so I want to get your first impressions on what we say when we say we're losing more cops. It's more than that. I mean, we put a lot of investment in them, and look at the return on investment.
Well, it's really quite tragic, and those videos are tough to watch and even tougher to listen to. I flew over a combat zone in Iraq, Operation Rocky Freedom, and it's still tough to listen to. When you hear and when you see what people are doing, putting themselves in harm's way, my heart goes out to them and to their families. I thank them for their service. And I'm reminded of a tough combat situation I was in after we got back, watching ambushes, seeing what happens on the front lines every day. When one of my soldiers asked me, "Sir, why are we here? Why are we here? They hate us here. They tell us that we're evil and that we're here to destroy things. We're not." And I told him simply that we're here to fight for people who can't fight for themselves, to defend people who can't defend themselves. And we're here to make sure that our brothers in arms go back wearing their flag, not draped in it. And I believe our officers go to work every single day in the same way. I think that they put themselves in harm's way because they truly love their communities and they're willing to put their lives on the line to protect them. Our officers, our good officers, deserve to be held in the highest of esteem, and bad cops held accountable. But this rhetoric needs to be stopped, and those in charge need to put an end to it, or else it's going to get worse.
Kennedy, as I listen to John James, I'm just prayerful that the cops that protect us, those who are left on the job now, are not asking the question that His soldiers ask him, why are we here? I mean, with all the rhetoric and the ambushes and the violence against cops, let's pray that they don't ever have to wonder why they're here. We need them.
No, it feels like that, especially when we see video like that female officer being attacked, just brutally attacked in San Francisco. But, you know, I look at that video and there's an active shooter. The sheriff's deputies hear gunfire, and, you know, the reflex is to immediately and quickly move toward the gunfire. And, you know, that is a level of bravery that very, very few people possess. And those are the kind of cops that you want on the street and in uniform protecting you. And the defund the police movement has been so destructive and so clumsy. And in fact, a lot of the cities where we've seen that, you've seen a huge exodus of officers in the force, but also you've seen more money go back into the force without some of the changes that people on both sides of the badge would like to see.
An astute observation, because eventually everybody realizes the facts, whether they want to admit it or not. Here's Jason Rantz from the last hour on the Faulkner Focus about the increased attacks on police officers.
Police officers all across the country being painted with this incredibly toxic broad brush, and it is inspiring people to attack. Not only is the morale down, but they're leaving these big departments in significant numbers. So the problem is only going to get worse, not just for the officers, but of course also for the people that they serve and protect.
As we bring it back to Studio F now, here in New York City. Kaylee, I want to get your response to that first and then ask you about something else.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's inhospitable, the environment that these police officers go into. I'm incredibly moved by what John James said. You've talked about your father coming home from Vietnam. I believe it was your father, you said, and the inhospitable environment that he was brought into coming back to this country. And for John James to describe that same feeling, and for our police officers as well, it's tragic.
You know, during some of the violent rioting that we saw in cities across the country, those what I call insurgents among the peaceful protesters, we saw the loss of an officer who was a veteran, retired, on camera live streaming.
Yeah, that's right. I will never forget. I was sitting in my apartment, and a colleague of mine who worked for me said, Kaylee, you've got to see this video. I pulled up the video, and there was an officer, former officer, lying on the ground in a pool of blood as you watched in real time his murder. This was David Dorn. He was a police officer. I immediately called the president at the time, President Trump, and he reached out to the widow, Ann Dorn, who described her husband this way. He was a father of 5, a brother of 12. A grandfather of 10, and friends to thousands. And I'd want to do her words justice. This is what she said in the wake of that murder. How did we get to this point where so many people are callous and indifferent towards human life? This is not a video game where you can commit mayhem and then just hit reset and bring all the characters back to life. David is never, never coming back to me. He was murdered by people who didn't know and just did not care. But we care, and Anne, we're thinking of you today and every day, and your husband, David. Thank you for his service.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he was out there protecting. I mean, he was trying to protect small businesses that were getting hit that night.
That's exactly
and he stood between the criminals and the glass on that pawn shop that his friends owned.
Yeah,
wow.
that's exactly right.
You know, Emily, when you look at the ambush-style attacks, and you heard what John was saying just moments ago about being on the battlefield with that type of thing, that's a different type of violence than we're used to with an uptick of 50%. And some of the police officers saying it's a direct outreach or reaction to defund the police. It's like hate in another category.
Right, and he also mentioned rhetoric, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that the rhetoric is not just coming from the anti-police movement that seems to have swept the country and is somehow condoned, for example, in the Amazon marketplace, selling anti-police t-shirts and the like. It is also coming from elected officials. I want to focus on San Francisco for a moment and that horrifying video we saw of the female officer getting brutally attacked by that homeless man. Specifically there have been spikes in violent crimes by the homeless. It took 4 bystanders to get him off before those police came. Now let's talk about the DA Chisa Boudin. He, as we know, was raised by the Weather Underground founders when both of his parents spent their lifetimes in federal prison for the murder of 2 police officers in a botched heist. They were part of Weather Underground. He served as a translator for Hugo Chavez. He had never prosecuted a day in his life before he was voted in by less than 3,000 votes there in San Francisco. He was a public defender. Now he comes out because of this situation, and guess who he blames? The officers.
Wow.
You cannot make this up. He says, I blame the union and I blame the failure of officers to clear crimes. He says, and I have to talk about doing words justice, let me tell you exactly what this DA prosecutor who was elected by the citizens, what he has said is to blame of these crimes, spikes in violence. He says the police wants to get away without doing their job. They want to get away with allowing their officers to send racist text messages, to use excessive force against the community, and to engage in systematic violations of civil rights of black and brown drivers on our streets. That was this weekend.
Wow.
After that video came out. That was his response to a female officer getting attacked when it was because of defunding why she was alone on the streets.
You know what? I want to go back to John James for just a second to react to that. John?
Well, frankly, we're seeing this all over the nation. We absolutely have to support our police, get support behind good police, hold bad police accountable, make sure that we fund the police, not defund the police, and make sure that egregious statements like that DA made are held accountable. What can you expect when you have representatives from the state of California like Maxine Waters perpetuating the type of hateful rhetoric against people who disagree with her, using her platform? We have to do better. We have to do better for our communities, for our police.
Yeah, and what you're talking about with Maxine Waters is when she ended up on the ground, you know, just hours before we were learning what was going to happen in the George Floyd case and his murder, the man Chauvin on trial for his murder. She said, you know, get confrontational, get up in their faces. I'm paraphrasing only a tiny bit there.